the Writer's Alley, where friends and stories meet. I am Mary V, your host for tonight's program. I'm sitting in the snowy north, and my guest is in the south, where the sun warms the beaches. Wherever you're from, we're glad you joined us this evening. Be sure to like this post and share it. Also, write your questions and comments below. We're happy to help. Since spring is almost here, we are dedicating the month of March to all things new. We'll discuss strategies and experiences to move us from that wonderful epic announcement, something new is about to happen, and on down the road that will take us to the product or finish line. Tonight, we are discussing what happens before, during, and after we receive that golden document, the book contract. My guest is Ashley Clark. She's a fellow Alley Cat who has recently signed her first book contract. Her book is titled The Dress Shop on King Street. Welcome, Ashley.
Thank you, Mary.
As you can guess, signing a book contract is an epic new experience. Actually, some listeners in our audience are reflecting on their first contracts. Others in the audience can only guess what that moment will be like, hoping it will happen soon. After you celebrated with telling all your friends, special dinner, maybe balloons and a cake, there must have been a sense of feeling overwhelmed. What went through your thoughts in terms of questions you had?
That's such a good question. A lot is the answer. I think more than anything, more than one specific question, there was a feeling of the sort of weightiness of the reality of it happening, because I had come to a point where I had been writing for years and years, and I had gotten very comfortable with writing really as worship, like between myself and God. And to have this open door that I had prayed and hoped for so long actually happen, brought with it this immense responsibility of wanting to steward that well and loving my book so much that I wanted to do justice to it. And so I don't know if there was one particular question so much as this one particular feeling of, oh man, let's make this count. I did also have questions regarding the process, like, okay, what's going to come next? I've never been on this side of it, and I don't want to embarrass myself by stepping on stumbling over anything.
So, like, what kind of questions did you have? Do you remember what they were at the time? I mean, thinking back to before things actually happened, do you remember what those questions were back when you first got that email?
Oh, sure. Yeah. And, Kara Putman is such a resource for me. I'm always going to her in a panic, like, what does this mean? What do I do? And my editor, Rayla, is just an absolute godsend too. And she has time and again really gone through things with me in great detail, which is helpful. But even just things like, okay, what's the difference between a sub edit and a line edit? Or how long do I need to plan to pace myself in between, these different stages? Or what's going to happen in terms of like reader reception? And how can I be sensitive to that and making sure I'm being proactive about who's going to read the book? Obviously you can never cater to what is everyone going to think, but at the same time, you do want to be sensitive and careful. And sure, a whole host of, for me, it was more so those practical questions of what do I do next? What do these terms and so forth even mean?
Right. I can understand that. I don't even understand some of the terms, and I don't know that anybody does, because they probably change over as you do each book. Like the second book, it probably is going to be even different yet.
Sure. That one. Yeah. Absolutely. Right. Yeah. And publishing house to publishing house too, you're going to see some variability with that as well. And so, yeah, absolutely.
They'll change as time moves on, as computers change, requirements change. And so it's probably always a learning curve to that, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, definitely.
So what did the publisher first actually want you to do specifically?
That's such a great question too. So it started off very early on. I pitched this book at ACFW. Goodness, it's been like 3 years ago that I initially pitched this book.
Hold on just a second. There might be some people in the audience who don't know what ACFW is, so you want to tell us what ACFW is?
Yeah, absolutely. ACFW is a wonderful writing organization, American Christian Fiction Writers. And I always highly recommend to everyone, if you're not involved with a writing organization, the best thing you could possibly do is to get yourself to a writing conference, because all of the connections that I have from my dearest of friends even just on a personal level, to my professional connections, have come through writing conferences and through affiliations otherwise with writing groups. Even if you can't afford a conference, you can probably afford, a $40 or so fee to a yearly writing group. So because I write inspirational fiction, American Christian Fiction Writers was the best fit for me. And it's really an amazing, amazing group. So I'm glad you asked that, Mary, because that is very important to clarify. And so I was at one of these conferences, and one of the things that they offer that's so helpful is the opportunity to talk one-on-one with editors and agents. And so Rayla is my acquisitions editor, and she is one of, in my opinion, the best acquisitions editor in the world. I just love her. I think the world of her. But she is one of the editors at Bethany House. And I had talked to her in years past, but none of the projects had quite stuck. We really were both interested in working with one another, but it just was a matter of fit. So understand that this is like a years upon years long type of development. And so she was interested in that story after I pitched it. And then I sent it to her probably 6 months later. It was later than I had planned because I had gotten bronchitis that year. So this is like a long extended timeline. And then I saw her again about 6 months after that. And I had just assumed, okay, I better have something else to pitch because I haven't heard from her. And this probably means that, they're not going to take this one. And she, as I started launching into my next pitch, she stopped me and she was like, well, wait, do you want to hear what we thought about your last book? And I was like,
you're kidding.
Yeah. And I was like, you had thoughts about my last book? I was so excited. And so she at that point asked if I would be open to revisions, which was a resounding yes on my part. I would have done about anything that they asked. And looking back, the book needed a lot of work. I thought it was close to done. It was not close to done. So I then got a really extensive revision letter from them. It was about 12 pages. Like it was a real revision letter. Yeah. And so I did that as quickly as I could, which took about 3 months. And then they liked what they saw. And so at that point, that's when I got contracted. And I actually still had the normal number of revisions even after. So I kind of had what we would call like sub edits. I actually kind of had 2 of those, but I was happy for it because I'm like the right.
Rewind. What are normal amount of edits? What do you mean by normal amount of edits?
Right. Great question. I just am meaning that in terms of how many stages it goes through, not necessarily in terms of the length, because that's going to vary according to the project, according to the publishing house and that type of thing. But typically you have sub edits, which are the big scale changes that need to be made. And then after that, you'll have another round where they look at, practicality. Did your character have father and the happen as you go through the story? You might change the story. And then you have your line edits, which are where they go line by line to actually make corrections and strengthen the prose. So I kind of had a doubled up sub edit in the sense that I went through 2 rounds of the really substantive type changes, which I was thrilled about, honestly, because I want, to make this thing as good as possible. So I will do however many edits it takes to get it there. But yeah, that's a good clarification. Good question.
So as the author, from the very first manuscript that you turned into this editor, which you felt at that time was wonderful, marvelous, and now this new one, how do you feel about the changes between the two?
Oh, that is another good question. And that is such a helpful thing to consider because in my opinion, this is going to sound like I'm diverging a little from the question, but stick with me. In my opinion, this is one of the reasons why you want to make sure that you've got the best possible fit in a publishing house, because editors are working very intimately with your story, and you need to make sure that you can trust what they have to say and that they are going to see things that are legitimately wrong, and that you then can trust, okay, I got to go all in and fix this stuff. And so for me, the reason why I say that is the editing team I've had is just off the charts. I mean, they're phenomenal. And so honestly, everything they've suggested, I've looked at it, even if I felt like, oh, this is going to be a lot to fix, I've looked at it and felt like that is absolutely right and a problem, and it's the kind of stuff that readers would pick up on if an editor didn't. I do think that authors have to be careful. Some friends who have had experiences where the editor was over editing and maybe looking more so in terms of voice or preference, trying to force something to fit their own, just their own tastes. And I'm very fortunate in that I haven't experienced that at all. There's never been a hesitation in my mind that I needed to do everything that they told me. And so, because of that, having just finished my last round of those sub-level edits, I feel like the book, I mean, it's twice the book that it was before. In some ways, literally. I actually I added like 40,000 words in the process of all that, if you can believe it. It's long now. But yeah, it was very necessary. And I think that's really the goal of, an editor, and the need for an editor, somebody who can see holes in your story. It's not just somebody who can fix grammar, which is important as well, but who has an eye to see into a story and to what it could be, and to do that in a way that is somewhat invisible, because you don't want somebody to leave sort of a thumbprint of their own
Right.
upon your book. Yeah.
Yeah, and that outside objective eye is so crucial for that very reason, because we are kind of stuck in how we think the story is, but to see the outside viewpoint, and to then, like you say, as the author, we get to decide yes or no, we like that idea or not. And generally speaking, we usually like what they say, because they bring new things to light that, oh, I didn't think about that.
Right, absolutely. And with that first batch of feedback I got, that's one of the things that I was just, honestly, I felt humbled by. That was the emotion, because they had clearly invested a lot of time in my characters. It wasn't just like, here's a problem, fix it. They had like deep level suggestions about the symbols I was using, about character motivation, things like that. And I think when you find somebody like that, they're worth their weight in gold, because to have someone be willing to invest that in your story, especially pre-contract, to me, it just spoke volumes. And I felt so, I was just moved to tears, really, that somebody would say, like, we believe in this story enough to want it to be all that it can be. So, yeah, I think absolutely what you said is a good way of putting it, because you really want to try to find somebody who is going to partner with the story itself. Definitely.
Make it the best it can be. So I've heard that publishers might change the title of the story. Did they change yours?
They sure did. And I was so sad at first, but I actually love the title now. And so it all worked out in the end. But I initially had called this story The Buttons That Bind Us, because there is a pair of heirloom buttons that travels through the whole book. And it actually starts in the prologue, and that's one of the reasons why the prologue is so important, because it anchors the story of the buttons. And so the story of the buttons is essentially the story of the character's heritage. Even as that heritage goes missing, the buttons themselves sort of create this tie, right? And there's also a deeper level symbolism with them, because they are the connection point, in the same way that God mends us, they allow for a mending. And so I just had my heart set initially on having buttons somewhere in the title. So I gave them all these other title suggestions, and every single one had the word buttons. And then they came back and they were like, these sound nice, but buttons is not a strong enough word for somebody who doesn't know the book, And I, of course, am so close to the book that in my mind it makes perfect sense. But looking back now with a little space between it, they're absolutely right. If I were to be in a bookstore and see something with the word buttons in the title, I would not assume that it would be the type of book that this is. And so I was initially like, not my buttons, but then Ray was actually the one who came up with the title, The Dress Shop on King Street. And when she did, I fell completely in love with it, because you'll see that
it's perfect.
Thank you. And you'll see the
It is.
dress shop is actually a really central symbol throughout the book as well. So not only does it anchor it in the location nicely, but it also is a representation more largely of the characters, both of the main characters' dreams. Of owning this dress store and then what ends up transpiring on King Street. And honestly, it works a whole lot better. It really does. And I think it stands out much better to readers. But yeah, that is something that can be hard because you do have to trust that the salespeople have their jobs for a reason, and you might be holding your little title very close to your heart, but they know what's going to actually appeal to readers. And so I'm
They
lucky in that
do.
I love my title, but go ahead,
All
Maddie, what
right,
were you going to say?
let's move on to the next one. Let's see. So you first submitted your full manuscript, and we know about the editings. And recently you submitted those second sub edits. You said that was probably a huge relief. I remember you when you responded to about that, how excited you were that they were finally sent. What happened? What do you think is going to happen between now and when the book is published? What responsibilities? Not on the part of the publisher, but on your part, what are they going to want you to do? Because I mean, we write the book, we think it's all done, and it's just kind of like we push a magic button and the publisher does it from here, and we can sit back and start writing the next book. True? Probably
No.
not.
But you're right. We do think that way, don't we? I think a lot of it has to do with, it's kind of like what I was saying with my title. We invest so much of ourselves into this thing and we think, oh, this is the best it can be. I've got it the best it can be. And I'm open to feedback, but I'm sure I won't need that because it's already great. And then you go back in with fresh eyes and with someone who looks at it from a new perspective and you realize, like, yikes, this is not as ready as I thought that it was, right? And so I still will have another round of edits that are the line edits in terms of making corrections and that kind of thing. And then after that, I'm still going to actually need to engage with it and further in terms of looking through arcs and looking at any possible typos, anything that I might have missed, especially in my line edits. Did I mess anything up in that? I mean, there are so many stages that go into
So
it. And
the editors don't do that for you?
I
I
know,
mean,
right?
they're
Imagine
editors.
that. But truly, though, I think it would be so hard if they did, even though it sounds like that would be a dream come true. In reality, I don't think it would, because
Yeah.
I like having the control over the way things are phrased or changed. And I know that, so I write women's fiction that's time slip. It goes back and forth between time periods. And so because of that, I sometimes get a little bit nerdy with grammar, like I like to throw in a colon here or there. And everybody's always been very gracious with me about my grammar stuff, but I don't know that they would if they just had free reign over it. And so it actually is nice, but you do definitely have to have your head in the game for the long term, because it is true, like by the time that you are at the end of it, you know your book inside and out. And if that is not the book, to be published, like by the time it gets published, you're probably not going to want to look at it again. You have to be very in love with your story to stick with it through all of the stages, for sure.
Which helps you to be able to do interviews like this off the cuff because you know your book so well. Even at
Right,
this point.
you do.
Well, okay, let's take a commercial break right here. Do you happen to have what the cover looks like, or can you tell us a little bit about the book, or both?
Yes, so I'm going to send a visual of the cover after the interview, but I will, because I have it on my phone. But I will go ahead and explain it a little bit to you. And
Okay.
so I told you already that the title is The Dress Shop on King Street. And I was initially thinking that they would send me cover options that had dress stores on them. So I was going through Pinterest and looking at all these different dress options and things like this. And then, but I had this idea, and that I sent them in my cover survey, and I had found this picture of this woman wearing a red hat. And my character, my historical heroine, wears a red hat throughout the whole story, which is fairly significant to her story. And so I was like, I have this kind of off the cuff idea. Don't know what you guys think of it, but what if we had just a woman with her hat? And it's a little ambiguous. You don't really know who she is. Is she maybe the modern day heroine? Is she definitely the historical heroine, what's kind of thing. And they loved that, and they were so receptive. And so when they came back with the book cover initially, I did not think they were going to actually do it. I thought for sure they would go more of like a traditional dress store route, you know? And so I was just thrilled beyond belief that they had my heroine with her hat on the cover. And so she's wearing her little red hat, and it makes you sort of wonder what happened to Shop on King Street, because to me it's sort of front and center the character as the story. It's a very important implication in terms of the story, since it is women's fiction. It's definitely got romantic elements, but at heart it is women's fiction. So I love that we have the woman front and center.
I do too. Well, now you mentioned terminology that some of us may not be familiar with. You said a cover survey sheet. Can you tell us what that is? Talk about that.
Right. Well, and that's a great question, because honestly, even some people who are published might not have had the same experience in that regard. I consider myself extremely fortunate in that the team at Bethany House has just been a dream, and they genuinely seek out author feedback. And so what I was able to do is to create a Pinterest board of different ideas, as well as just images. And then I also had a brief survey where I gave them a summary of the book. I gave them a little bit about me also, and kind of the vibe that I wanted. I let them know some different color schemes that I liked even. And then at the end, if I had any ideas for what I wanted on the cover, which I did with the whole red hat thing. And I never thought they would actually do it, but they did. I was so excited.
And it looks great.
I could put those in the final paragraph. And so I consider myself very, 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 very blessed in that regard, because not all publishers do that, you know. Honestly, like, art, sales, and marketing teams know what they're doing. And sometimes we might think an image, as an author, we might think an image looks great, and maybe it does look great, but that might not necessarily be what's going to sell your book well. And
Right.
At the end of the day, what you need is what is going to cause people to actually pick this book up, you know, because it's like the old adage, you can't judge a book by its cover. And so really at heart, you want to have somebody say, this is what's going to sell well. So this is the title and this is the look, you know. And so for me to be able to have both, something that I love, but that I am also confident is in keeping with the genre and what reader expectations would be, is something that I don't take for granted, because I don't think that that's a typical experience. I have a lot of friends who got their covers back and they were kind of like, oh, that's not what I pictured. I like it okay, but that's not quite what I pictured, you know.
On the other hand, even though you can't judge a book by its cover, the marketing team does realize that when a person looks at a book cover, that they will have certain expectations of the story within. So they're going to make it so it does match. It just may not be exactly what we had in mind, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, because they know what those expectations are better than we do.
Yeah. So when is your book going to be published?
It's going to be out December 3rd, 2020.
This year?
This year.
That's going to be fast. That is really exciting. So, okay, writing, like any other craft, takes time to refine, hone new skills, and send off to agents or publishers. How long did it take before you received that first contract?
From the start?
Yeah.
You mean?
Yeah.
10 years. It took 10 years. Isn't that wild?
So what were you doing all that time?
What did you say?
What were you doing all that time? Why did it take so long?
I just kept writing more books.
I can say that because I'm in the same boat, so I'm not really giving at you. I think a lot of us are in the same boat.
I think that very much so. And I'm glad you asked that question for that reason, because I came to a point several years ago where I felt like I had really come into my writing voice more. Probably about 5 or 6. I mean, it was a long time. Probably 5 or 6 years into writing novels is when I found Time Slip, and I sort of found my voice a little better. And I can remember being just absolutely sure that that particular project was going to sell, because it felt different. Like I could feel it, and it didn't. And it went pretty far, but it didn't sell. And I was just like, what now? You know, and I remember feeling so Um,
Hmm.
just discouraged, but also confused. Like, well, I thought this was what I was waiting for. Like with each book, my goal always had been and still is really to continue to improve off the last. And so to come to a point where I felt like my skills were there, but it still wasn't happening was very demoralizing. And I think there are a lot of people in the industry who are in that place. They have been writing, like you said, 5, 10 years, maybe even longer. And they're kind of like, what's wrong with me? And I think
Yes.
that a lot of the time it's not that anything is wrong with you. And in fact, in my case, I was right. And that book ended up selling as part of this series. So that particular book, even though I ended up, I didn't realize it at the time, but I was writing them out of chronological order. And that particular book is actually going to be book 2, which is really cool how God did that.
Whoa.
So you just never know. Like, I think that there is a time and a place for focusing on, you always want to be honing your skill. You always want to be teachable. Absolutely. But you also at some point have to find your confidence and say, even if I'm getting rejections, if they're positive and I'm getting pretty close, then the problem might not necessarily be me. It might just be the fact that there are very few slots. And, editors have to look for things like genre and voice, and just make sure that it fits well. Because the thing is, the flip side of that is, once you launch, you're launched, like you only get to do that one time. And so while it's agonizing to wait, at the same time, you want to make sure that it's the right fit, and they want to make sure that it's the right fit. So it could be the kind of thing where it feels like it's taking forever and ever, and you're like, I really thought this was the one, but it might truly be for the best, for everybody, for it to take a different timeline than what you would have expected.
Once that book hits the bookshelf, it's there, and you can't take it back and fix manuscripts or do anything like that again. So
Right.
along this line, do you think you would have received this book offer if you didn't have an agent?
No, there is no way that I would have gotten this offer if I didn't have an agent, because, and I say I'm with Karen Solom of Spencer Hill. And there are so many reasons why I would never have gotten this if it weren't for her. Bethany House really only looks at agented manuscripts anyway. Like, on occasion, they will take someone that they've met at a conference, but pretty much exclusively they only work with agented submissions, and most of the houses are going to be that way. So from a practical standpoint, they honestly would probably have never even looked at it. But apart from that, I can't even begin to express how vital Karen's experience and wisdom have been for me over the years, because especially when I first signed with her, I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know the difference between all the different choices that I could be making with my stories. And she has given me such consistent feedback, and she's kept me from situations that wouldn't have been good for me, that I might have jumped into, and just in
Wow.
not knowing otherwise. And so, yeah, without her, it never would have happened. And I always encourage people in that regard, if you're not agented, even if you do have editors who are interested, I would encourage you to not only find an agent, but to find one who you trust, because ultimately you need someone who can see beyond your story that you're so in love with into your career. And you need to find somebody who actually knows how to do that, who's done it before, because none of us as writers, we haven't done that before. We don't
No.
know the ins and outs. And let me tell you, whenever I got my contract and all of the legalese of it, I had no idea what I was looking at. Like, I was just like, okay, if Karen says that all is well, then all is well. So even with regard to things like that, it would be very, very overwhelming to try to navigate without an agent. So I think it's great. I always encourage people, talk to editors at conferences, certainly, even if you're unagented, but start with an agent first.
So you said in the big while ago that it's important to trust the publisher, and I hear you saying again that it's important that you trust the agent. There's a whole lot of trust that's required out there because our books are so important to us. We want them to be the best they can be and to hit the right genre at the right time at the right publishing house, and all that is based on trust. Right.
Absolutely. And all of us are limited by our own perception, however wise our own perception may be. At the end of the day, it's still a limitation. And so, as a writer, your book is like your child. Like, you are going to be blind to things because you love it. The other people are not blind to you. And you need to, a lot of times, and I remember feeling this, and I get it, but I think a lot of times there's this almost desperation, particularly with agents. If I could just get an agent's attention, if I could just
Right,
get somebody to sign with me, then
right.
they could get my book in front of everybody and then it would all just work out. But in actuality, that's not the case. And your relationship with your agent needs to be a mutual type of relationship. You do need to be thrilled to have them, sure, especially in the way the industry is. Like, it can be difficult, it can take a while to find a good fit, but it's not a one-way street. Like, they need to be glad that they have you on board too, and they need to genuinely be enthusiastic about your
Mhm.
project. And so in that regard, yeah, finding somebody that you can trust, both in terms of an agent as well as an editor, it can take time. And I think sometimes we start to see, we perceive self failure, in that, and we get self doubt, and just, it's a struggle. It's hard sometimes to wait. We think, oh, if I were a really good writer, then somebody would just be following it. Like, I would have like 5 agents trailing me, begging me for my book,
That would be
but
nice.
often it's not a matter of that, especially if you're writing in a genre that's not selling right now, then it might just take a while. But that doesn't mean you need to abandon ship. If you know that what you're doing is what you're supposed to be doing, then keeping on. I mean, look at like rom-com, for example. When I first started writing, chick lit was dead. Like, it had just died because the economy was down, and it just, as a genre, it just totally crashed. And now you see tons of rom-com, both in general
Right.
market as well as in CBA, and everything comes back. So I would just caution everyone, make decisions based off of your long-term career level goals
Right.
versus just wanting validation or just wanting to get that book out. Because once you get that book out, what comes next? Like, you really want to think in terms of, and for some people, that's all they want. It's just one book to have, and that's fine. That's great, But if you're looking at it with the dream of it being a career, you need to plan with the intentionality of it being a career. And finding the right fit with an agent as well as an editor is a huge part of that, in my opinion.
And help you along between this point until that point is having a writing community really does help. Like the Alley Cats, where we get together, and there's other organizations like Seekerville and other organizations that are so incredibly helpful. I mean, we are out here, we are a community, and we want to embrace where you are and to help you. And if you have any questions or things that we've not addressed in this particular topic, we want to make sure that you do put them in the comments section below. We're going to be watching for them and answering the questions as they come up as best we can. I think, unfortunately, we're going to have to close out. I'm Mary V, along with Ashley Clark on the Writer's Alley, and we'll see you the next time.